So we're not going to find a granite countertop all nice and pretty up there, Bill?
I strongly suspect not, but it looks like bazillions of rounded boulders.
The same day, all the fountains of the great deep were broken up, and the windows of heaven were opened. Welcome to this episode of Hydroplate Theory University with Hydroplate Theory experts Kevin Lea and Bill Wells.
All right, welcome back to Hydroplate Theory University, website.com, YouTube station Hydroplate Theory, and click on the icon. This is our 8th podcast, August 12th, 2026. We're going to be answering questions this time submitted by viewers about Asteroid Intro Part 1 and 2. I had said we are going to do limestone, but based on the importance of these questions, we're going to be covering this now. And the answers for this session, like all the teachings of this podcast, is from In the Beginning, Compelling Evidence for Creation and the Flood by Dr. Walt Brown, 9th edition. And we want to always start out our podcast with one reminder for what the Bible says. And the Bible says that thousands of years ago, about 5,000 years ago, in the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, in the 17th day of the month, on that day, all the fountains of the great deep were broken up, and the windows of heaven were opened, and the rain was on the earth 40 days and 40 nights. The fountains of the great deep implied that there was an ocean underneath the crust that ruptured up. The windows of heaven open were postulating that was God telling us that there would be material going up into space as a result of the rupturing of the fountains of the great deep. And there would also be things coming back from space. And so we've shown this before, but just as a lead-in before this question comes up that we're going to be dealing with, is that we see down here, this is the subterranean chamber water, the ocean of water underneath the crust, the red dot there. And it's rupturing up by a fractured crust, the 46,000 mile crack that circumnavigated the globe in different areas. You know, we can see where that crack was by looking at the mid-oceanic ridge, which is a scar of where it happened. And the subterranean chamber waters are explosively leaving the ocean, coming up, hydroblasting the two sides of the crust. And it's also going to be removing the crust at the bottom, because the crust at the bottom has been weakened by supercritical water. And it's also going to be sending up mantle material, because the mantle material has been weakened by the supercritical water that has dissolved the minerals. And so you would expect, hydroplate theory predicts that what is going to be found up in space, as well as on the Earth and the sedimentary layers, is blasted rock from the granite crust and blasted mantle material that all goes up. And we want to emphasize that this, we'll call this a pillar, even though that wasn't the intent of the animator for this. But this area, there would have been pillars touching down on the mantle through the subterranean chambers that were iron nickel. So God created this crust with what we see for the top 7 miles granite, but we don't know what's below that. And we do know that the pillars were made of iron and nickel and other metals. So we only know that from the evidence of what has come to the surface as a result of the rupture phase. And this picture comes from Mission Imperative, Mike Snavely's ministry, and the animation that you saw in the first intro, if you saw that. And so, Bill, take the first question, if you'd like.
Well, I'd like to emphasize, Kevin, that we know that what the granite on the first 7.6 miles of the granite looks like, and is because we can directly examine that as per the Kola borehole up in the Kola Peninsula by the Russians. Anything below that is an indirect measurement. So as far as what we actually know about the lower portion of the crust is we really don't know exactly what it is. And so going to our first question, these questions are taken off of our YouTube channel. And we have a question, I believe that's Dr. Howard Feldman. And his question is, if asteroids and meteors all came from the fountains of the deep erupting through the granite crust, why are no asteroids or meteorites made of granite? In fact, many of the rock types in meteorites are rare on Earth's crust. Where are all the granite meteorites? Well, in answer to that question on the YouTube channel, a Frank Hubeny, I believe that's how you pronounce that, he had such a good answer that Kevin and I decided to start off with that. And he said, since the source of the material in the asteroids comes from the fountains of the deep, in hydroplate theory, one would expect this material to be composed of eroded pieces of granite, biological chemicals, radioactive and other isotopes created in the pillars through the piezoelectric effect, water, salts, atmosphere, material from the mantle. Given hydroplate theory, I would not expect an asteroid to be made of only granite.
And we're going to find out that that's, they aren't made of just granite. And when he talks about the piezoelectric effect, for those that are not, versed in the hydroplate theory, that's talked about in the radioactivity chapter, which we're not going to cover now, but it's a very important aspect of this debate.
Later on in the discussion, we're going to be talking about the tremendous forces and its effects on material as the fountains of the great deep were erupting from the subterranean chambers. So its effects on the granite crust are quite significant. And we're also going to be talking about exactly how much material has been examined on the granite from the asteroids and comets.
Yeah. So how much material has been brought back from the different space probes that we've sent into space.
So we asked AI, are stony meteorites in any way chemically similar to crust on the Earth? And the answer from AI was yes, stony meteorites share broad chemical similarities with Earth's outer layers because both are rich in silicate materials, which are compounds made of silicon and oxygen.
Yeah, and so Dr. Feldman said there's no meteorites, asteroids, comets that have any indication of having come from the Earth. Well, a meteorite is a meteoroid in space that becomes a meteor going through the atmosphere, lands on the Earth and becomes a meteorite that people collect thousands of them and analyze them. And what they find out in the stony meteorite category is that they're very similar to Earth's outer layers because of their rich in silicate, which is what granite is made out of. So there is evidence right here. And the similarities are that both stony meteorites and Earth's crust mantle are dominated by minerals like olivine and pyroxene.
And the igneous analogs, a specific subgroup of stony meteorites called chondrites, undergo melting and planetary evolution, making their mineral makeup chemically very similar to terrestrial basaltic lavas.
Yeah. And of course, this is AI answering from an evolutionary paradigm where they talk about planetary evolution, which again, there's no God that created the heavens and the earth, that somehow, which they don't even know how, because every theory about, meteoritic bombardment and all this other stuff on how the earth came to be have serious problems, which we're not going to get into right now. But these aren't Christian hydroplate theory, evolution friendly AI trained narratives. Their perspective of these are from planetary evolution, which, the one that's most popular is that the Earth formed by meteoric bombardment and at one time was molten, and therefore they're bringing up the basalt.
And the third category, general building blocks, most users on Reddit agree that primitive stony meteorites, or chondrites, represent the foundational silicate chemistry from which rocky planets like Earth accreted. Of course, that's from an evolutionary view. The hydroplate answer is that the Earth did not accrete, and only hydroplate theory can explain these chondrites, because chondrites have some very unique characteristics,
which we'll get into here. And this is from, the 9th edition of Dr. Brown's book, In the Beginning, which you can read online at creationscience.com, flipbook, or you can purchase the book at Amazon. And this is from 359, talking about meteorites returning home. And if you look at this paragraph right there, minerals and isotopes in meteorites are remarkably similar to those on Earth. This is Walt writing this with an endnote 41, which we'll get to in a minute, which is a secular peer-reviewed article where that statement was made. Hundreds of meteorites contain tiny diamonds, and that's endnote 48. Since meteorites come from outer space and diamonds are carbon, where did such concentrations of carbon come from? So how can you have diamonds that are carbon under extreme pressure and temperatures that can be created in the lab today? Hydroplate theory explains where temperature and pressure can turn carbon into diamonds, but how do you get that in space? And hundreds of them have been found with tiny diamonds. And there is no vegetation that can grow in outer space to be the carbon to go ahead and be a diamond. So what's this? The only answer there is that, hey, something from Earth with carbon, with life, got compressed here on Earth and then sent up to space as a diamond. And then other meteorites contain limestone, which on Earth forms in the presence of liquid water. And there's a whole chapter devoted to limestone, which we'll be getting to in a future podcast. So looking at endnote 41, we see this is, again, a secular article. Meteorites and probably all meteoroids contain the same materials as those contained in Earth itself. So again, Dr. Feldman is saying that there's no evidence. Well, here are articles in 1974. Things haven't changed since 74. Those were the results of the meteorites then, and the meteorites now give the same evidence, including asteroids, Bennu and Ryugu. Modern mass spectrometry techniques had revealed that the isotopic, meaning the isotopes of the different elements within the minerals, in meteorites, including primitive class of meteorite called chondrites, are within air identical to those found on Earth itself. The thousands of meteorites that strike the Earth each year are generally believed to be either fragments of a disrupted planet or planets that originally resembled the Earth. So these secular Big Bang evolutionary mindset people say that these thousands of asteroids, meteorites, that we analyze, they look like they're fragments from a planet just like Earth. Well, yeah, they were just like Earth because they came from Earth. And Dr. Feldman needs to, understand, as well as all evolutionists that want to use this, the same argument that Dr. Feldman's making, they've known this for years, decades.
Kevin, on page 418 of Dr. Brown's 9th edition, is a picture of chondrules, and the central chondrule is shown 2.2 millimeters, and that chondrule is material that was once melted, but then solidified, but you can see that the chondrule is within a matrix of other rocks. And so about this, one scientist wrote, "The heat source of chondrule melting remains uncertain. We know from the petrological data that we are looking for a very rapid heating source, but what? But the heating source could only heat the chondrules and melt them, as indicated by the fact the appearance of the matrix around the chondrules, that it did not melt. So the temperature for heating came in very specific points in the chondrules, melted them, and then they solidified. That is something that requires very unique conditions. Sometimes lightning can cause chondrules to form on Earth, but then you have to ask the question, where does lightning come out of outer space in order to form that? Something out in outer space that will be heating up, the entire object would be heating up. And to get it to melt the chondrules, you would expect that the material around the chondrules would have melted, but they show no sign of melting. So whatever formed chondrules had some very, very unique conditions, which really only the hydroplate theory can explain.
And it's explained on page 418, which is the radioactivity chapter. And the radioactivity chapter very clearly explains exactly how these things happen. No one else to this date has come up with an alternate explanation that's scientifically viable. So although we know that the upper crust to 7 miles deep is composed of various created granite mixtures of minerals with different colors, we don't know, as Bill had emphasized earlier, how God created the crust below this. And just an example of God's creative diversity that we see even in the rest of the creation, which Romans 1 says that God made this incredible creation to testify that he exists, is that the colors of granite, you can get all kinds of colors of granite for your kitchen counter. It's all based on the different emphasis of the minerals that are in there. So quartz gives a clearer gray. Feldspar gives opaque white. Potassium feldspar gives pink, salmon or deep red colors. Biotite and I might have botched this, amphibole, dark brown, black, and dark green specks. And muscovite is metallic gold. And so we see even in the sedimentary layers, which hydroplate theory postulates that the sedimentary layers were busted up granite and mantle material and lower crustal material, whatever God created it to be, that went all over the world. And it created horizontally laid down layers of sediment all over the world. As we said earlier, at 1.5 feet per hour during the 150-day flood, which then solidified by the silicates and the limestone that we'll cover in the limestone chapter. And they have different colors because the mineral mixture was going to be different. The solidifying agents were going to be differently concentrated, which is why you get certain rock layers that are harder than others, and sandstone that's between them that didn't get the hard solidifying agents. All of that is explained by the hydroplate theory. And so we would also add, Bill?
The pillars of the pre-flood Earth were iron and nickel and were ejected during the rupture event and are expected sources of the iron-nickel asteroids and meteorites. Only hydroplate theory can explain the iron meteorites with the Widmanstätten patterns that are depicted in the 9th edition. So the way that the hydroplate theory explains is that when you have iron nickel, it needs to be heated to the point where it can be smelted out, so to speak, from the source rock. And so we have iron and nickel that has the appearance of being smelted out of a source rock, but then these Widmanstätten patterns show that this rock, this iron nickel rock, was exposed continuously to 1300 degrees in order to form these patterns. A meteorite entering the Earth's atmosphere, for example, would only be heated at a high temperature on the outside. It wouldn't penetrate all the way to the inside. So these rocks, these iron nickel rocks that are found in the asteroids, have been continually soaked in a 1300 degree temperature for a long enough period of time for these Widmanstätten patterns to form. And that is something that the hydroplate theory can explain that really can't be explained by something happening out in outer space.
Yeah. And I would say, yeah, that it's iron nickel asteroids and meteorites, which are not normally talked about by geologists as rocks.
If you're enjoying Hydroplate Theory University, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel by searching Hydroplate Theory University and clicking our official logo. We're organizing the series into playlists for each chapter of Dr. Walt Brown's book. Right now, we're covering the chapter overviews, and once those are complete, we'll come back and explore each chapter in greater depth. You can also find every episode and chapter at hptuniversity.com. We're still finishing a few parts of the website, but everything will be there soon. Now, let's get back to Hydroplate Theory University.
The olivine was part of the crust and mantle. And we get this from the EBSCO.com website. And they quote, olivine is a significant component of Earth's lower crust and upper mantle, often found in volcanic rocks, particularly basalt. It is also one of the primary minerals found in certain types of meteorites.
And so, once again, still dealing with Dr. Feldman's point, we don't see anything from the crust or the mantle or anything up in space, so you're wrong. Well, another item is olivine. Walt predicted olivine would be found. He sent me and others an email just before Stardust space probe landed, predicting that they would find olivine, and they find olivine. And it came from the crust and the mantle, the fountains of the Great Deep sending that material up.
So also this observation on the EBSCO website seems to contradict Dr. Feldman's assumption that everything coming out of the crust of the Earth is simply going to be granite, whereas this observation notes that in the lower crust, or the lower part of the crust and upper part of the mantle, olivine is also found. So this is an example that what we really can examine directly really only is from the surface down to about 7.6 miles. Beyond that is subject to less certainty about what's actually down there in the lower part of the crust.
And it should be noted that, Dr. Feldman is saying, you guys haven't found granite. And so you're wrong. That's basically what he's saying. Well, I'm holding up a bag of 4.5 ounces of dirt out of my front yard. And that is the total amount of material that has been brought back. I mean, I'm not dealing with meteorites, but the total amount brought back from Comet and Asteroid space probes that have spent over $2 billion to get 4.5 ounces of dirt. And there's trillions of tons of comet and asteroid and trans-Neptunian objects and meteoroids out there. And so for him to say there isn't any granite in here, so you're wrong, is kind of disingenuous, recognizing how much material hydroplate theory posits that has actually been ejected into space. And so that brings us up to the next item. The Wild-2 comet, spelled Wild-2, 1 milligram. Itokawa, 1,500 microscopic dust grains. Ryugu, 4.5 grams. Bennu, 121.6 grams. Mostly because they almost sank the Bennu, the OSIRIS-REx probe into the surface of Bennu because it was such a loosely held together rock pile. They almost wasted $1 billion mission. And so it completely filled up its little sample pod. So a total of 4.5 ounces. And so our response would be, look, if you go and send another $1 billion space probe out there, and instead of just collecting it, you have somebody bring back rocks. Here is a picture of the 67P comet that was landed on. And the lander was able to take this picture of this crater, and it's hard to see, but there's a bunch of rocks, rounded off rocks in that crater wall, millions of them. And they're 10 feet in diameter. And we would postulate that if we ever are able to go and actually get a solid rounded off boulder off of 67P or something else, and actually we postulate that the bigger pieces of rock are going to be in the center of all asteroids and meteors by the laws of gravity and based on the paradigm of how asteroids and comet debris was ejected into space. The larger rocks, solid rocks from the crust and the mantle are going to be in the center, or as we see here, these are a bunch of rounded off boulders. And how do you get rounded off boulders on Earth? By, water flowing down a river and knocking off all the edges. How do you get rounded off boulders in space? By ejecting at hypersonic velocity with a bunch of material going by and next to and the wearing effect, and rounded them all off and sent them up into space. Only the hydroplate theory can postulate something that explains what we're seeing.
So I would add that if Dr. Feldman really wants to find granite on comets and asteroids, get a mission up and grab one of these 10-foot rounded boulders, and we strongly suspect that that is where you're going to find granite boulders that were just rounded off.
Yeah. So we're not going to find a granite countertop all nice and pretty up there, Bill?
I strongly suspect not. But it looks like bazillions of rounded boulders.
Yeah. So, and pick this one up, Bill.
Continuing on, not all ejected material came from the crust. Hydroplate theory postulates that mantle and lower crust material was also jettisoned into space, which explains, by the hydroplate theory, the discovery of olivine and serpentinite on asteroids or comets.
And this was shocking. When they found serpentinite, it was shocking. It was so shocking that Astro Alexandra did a segment on this on her podcast, on her short podcast. How do you get something that is found on the mantle at the mid-oceanic ridge, this special mineral that takes the conditions that are found at the mid-oceanic ridge up onto an asteroid? Well, there it is. How hard is it for HPT to explain why it's there? None. It's expected. How do other people explain it? Well, they have a problem.
And the serpentinite forms in extremely hot water, liquid water, which is something the hydroplate theory can explain.
So, Dr. Feldman, he wrote down this, hit piece on our YouTube channel comments. If asteroids and meteors all come from the fountains of the great deep erupting through the granite crust, why are no asteroids or meteorites made of granite? In fact, many of the rock types and meteorites are rare on Earth's crust. Where are all the granite meteorites? So I hope we've dealt with this question scientifically. And Dr. Feldman doesn't understand the hydroplate theory, and he ignores the evidence showing that he is wrong. He, along with all evolutionary astronomers, have no clue how comets, asteroids became floating rock dust piles, but think they know that the hydroplate theory, which does explain exactly how they formed, is false. So Dr. Feldman's, as all evolutionists, they always ding us, well, what about this and what about that? Well, we've got a what about times 1,000 more than they do. What about the chicken and the egg? What about all the symbiotic relationships of everything on Earth? Oh, Dr. Feldman, what about carbon-14 in dinosaur bones? Every single dinosaur that's been tested has carbon-14, which means they've only been dead for thousands of years. What does that do to your 60 million year paradigm where it destroys it? But we know you're not going to let it be destroyed because the God of time and chance is too important. The religion behind evolution is too important to abandon, because if you abandon it, you have to grab something else. And if you grab something else, the only other choice is we were created by God. The dinosaurs have only been dead for thousands of years. And not just carbon-14, which I'm sure Dr. Feldman has heard all about, but there's also soft tissue found in dinosaur bones that don't last for 60 million years. The evidence is overwhelming. Hydroplate theory explains why comets and asteroids are found to be, they predicted, Walt predicted they'll be found to be floating rock piles in 2001. What is every single asteroid comet visited that's not a solid rock that's small, that's spinning too fast to be an asteroid? Now, all the bigger asteroids over like 600 meters, they're all floating rock piles. That's a postulate of the hydroplate theory, and it is what they are finding.
So going on to question 2 from Dr. Feldman, no LIRS has been found on any asteroid or meteorite so far. LIRS is a well-defined geologic term that refers to well-sorted silt, which on Earth is usually accumulated by wind deposition. No well-sorted silt has been found on any outer space rock.
Well, once again, we have to ask, is that true? No, it's not true, as we're going to see.
That LIRS would be found on comets is Dr. Brown's prediction number 36 in the 9th edition of In the Beginning. That can be found at the Creation Science Center website and can be read for free. Also, that flip book that is on the website has a very good search function, which is quite handy. I use that in conjunction with the hard copy of the book that I have. So prediction number 36 says spacecraft landing on comet's nucleus will find that comets and bodies hit by comets such as Mars contain LIRS, salt, bacteria, and traces of vegetation. So we asked AI, what is the mineral property of LIRS? The answer? LIRS is a clastic, broken pieces of rock. It's a clastic wind-blown sedimentary deposit composed primarily of silt-sized quartz grains, 60 to 70%, bound by a matrix of feldspars, micas, carbonates, and clay minerals. AI says, yes, all these minerals have been identified in asteroids or meteorites, though their abundance varies drastically when compared to the Earth. So pursuing that further, we asked AI, could LIRS come from pulverized crustal material? The answer is yes. LIRS fundamentally originates from pulverized crustal material ground down by glacial action, so they say, or weathered in deserts.
And the reason why we say so they say is they're saying that's the only way that LIRS can be made. Well, if it's pulverized crustal material, and hydroplate theory pulverizes that same crustal material and jettisons some of it up into space, some of it came down to bury the frozen mammoths, along with the water and debris that buried the frozen mammoths, but some of it got blown into space. So they only really define LIRS as something that's found on Earth that's wind-blown, that came from glacial action. And so they're defining a term, and then Dr. Feldman's going to say, well, you don't have any on asteroids and comets. Well, that's not true, because you find that LIRS is made of pulverized granite, which is what is on asteroids, as we've already made clear.
So what we're seeing here is another example of what I discussed in my bio on episode number 2, is that it's very possible, and we have it here, to have the same evidence, but yet a completely different interpretation.
Yeah, and the reason why Walt made that a prediction is because pulverized crustal material LIRS, along with the frozen water, as I've already alluded to, and the carbon dioxide that was jettisoned from the subterranean chambers up into space and came back down as dry ice, is what buried the mammoths. Mammoths walking, frozen solids, standing up, the one that's featured in Walt Brown's chapter on the frozen mammoths. And so Walt theorized that the same dirty water, the inside the lungs of the frozen standing up mammoth, was dirty water, dirty LIRS water. It's buried in this very dirty ice, with carbon dioxide buried in with the ice. As soon as you expose the ice, then the iron that's in there starts to rust, because what was coming down is carbon dioxide as well. And so it reached to some of it, instead of coming back down to bury the mammoths, would have also been part of the asteroids and comets. That's why he predicted that you would find it. But the way the evolutionists define LERS, they will never say that it has been found on comets and asteroids, but it actually has. And the other thing that was so surprising to the astronomers when they did impact missions on asteroids or comets, like the Temple 1, I think it was $1 billion mission, went to go shoot a copper slug at the Temple 1 asteroid. The Deep Impact space mission shot a copper bullet into the Temple 1, and then they had a camera to watch the collision that was supposed to just make a crater. It blinded the camera to the point where they didn't even know what happened, because the blinding was all this very powdery dust that was kicked up by that collision, reflected so much sunlight that it made the camera useless. It almost was a botched mission. And they actually resent the Stardust space probe out to go see that same Temple 1 comet to try and see the crater. And they actually had to try and save the original mission by seeing the crater and what happened. And I cover that in my Nebraska thing. I don't want to get into it now, but there's not even a crater there because of how loosely held together that Temple 1 comet was when it got hit. So, yeah, LERS is up there in space by our definition. Pulverized granite that went on to comets and asteroids. So again, he said it wouldn't be there. It's not found. Well, Dr. Feldman is wrong. If he opens his mind to the definition of people that aren't thinking we're billions of years old and millions of years of ice ages and grinding this stuff and wind blowing it, and he simply ignores the evidence to the contrary.
So moving on to statement 3, there are no traces of plants or bacteria, only chemicals which may or may not have come from life. But after being told that amino acids were found, particularly on Bennu and Ryugu, Dr. Feldman continues, of course that's all true, but that is not evidence the compounds in the asteroids came from life. The only conclusions consistent with the data is that we don't know. Organic compounds could have been made abiotically.
Which means not from life. So he's saying, yeah, you found some amino acids, but we evolutionists and millions and billions of years and our God of time and chance can do anything, includes that in a vacuum and absolute zero space, somehow amino acids could just come together by time and chance. And so we can't prove that it came from life. Well, we're going to use the data of what we know about amino acids and how they come together and how they're used in life to refute what Dr. Feldman has said here. And besides that, there's already been bacteria fossils have been found in 3 meteorites. And 78 types of living bacteria have been found in 2 meteorites after extreme precautions were taken to avoid contamination. Now, that doesn't mean that these scientists that have been investigating meteorites for years haven't had to conclude, well, it must be contamination, because they couldn't explain how these bacteria could have formed on anything up in space. Well, they weren't formed on these things in space. They were formed on Earth and jettisoned with those meteorites into space, coming back down with bacteria. Bacteria need liquid water to live, grow, and reproduce. Obviously, liquid water does not exist inside meteoroids, whose temperatures are near absolute zero. Therefore, the bacteria must have been living in the presence of liquid water before being launched into space. Once in space, they quickly froze and became dormant. Had bacteria originated in outer space, what would they have eaten? So they went into some bacteria go into a dormant spore phase. And we found it on Ryugu as well, which we'll get to next week. But bacteria fossils have been found. This is documented in Walt Brown's book on page 359. And here is endnote 99. where in March 2011, Richard Hoover wrote an article that, hey, we found bacteria fossils in 3 meteorites. EndNote 103, where there's been extreme precautions taken. They found 78 types of living bacteria. Some different microbial species derived from samples of meteorites have been cultured, cloned, and classified as 16S rDNA typing and found to be not essentially different from present-day organisms here on Earth. They also appear sensitive to growth inhibitions by specific antibiotics. So that article was 2001. It's been known, but it's not, Dr. Feldman he can't read any of the, textbooks that go out to college and to elementary school and, of these things, because the evolutionists have censored all that stuff getting in the books because they can't explain how bacteria can get there. Hydroplate theory can explain it. They predicted it in 2001. And going on with EndNote 103, a geologist working with Italian, a professor of microbiology in Naples, identified and brought back to life extraterrestrial microorganisms lodged inside a 4.5 billion year old meteorite kept at Naples. Now, and supposedly 4.5 billion years, because Bill and I just went to the Creation Research Society conference where microbiologists, chemists there's hard data that even spore bacteria like bacillus, they can't last for 4.5 billion years. They will degrade and not be able to come out of their spore phase to live. And yet this geologist was able to bring back life, extraterrestrial life, in microorganisms, and that's not possible. So that means they're only thousands of years old. This meteorite was only thousands of years because that's when it was jettisoned into space.
So for a modern example, as covered in the 2 previous podcasts that were intros to the asteroid chapter, consider the organics recently found on both Ryugu and Bennu asteroids. Kevin's going to cover right now in this podcast the all 5 nucleobases necessary for DNA and RNA found on Ryugu and Bennu. And then the next podcast will cover 14 of the 20 amino acids necessary for making proteins, as well as the bacillus bacteria that was found on Ryugu as a culturable bacteria.
So the discovery of all 5 nucleobases necessary for DNA and RNA were found on 2 different asteroids by 2 different space probes sent by 2 different countries, and they were analyzed in 2 different clean rooms, and they both found all 5 nucleobases necessary for creating all DNA and RNA. And so, question to AI. Has anyone demonstrated the ability to form the 5 nucleobases abiotically, meaning without it being from life, in the same environmental condition? Surprise answer, no. The short answer, I do not find any convincing experimental demonstration in which the nucleobases were all produced together in one experiment under one environmental condition. And the emphasis here is because in devotion to the time and chance God, the evolutionists are doing everything they can. I mean, they are spending millions and millions of dollars ever since the Miller-Urey experiment to try and create these things that God created without God. They're trying to use their intelligence to create these things in the lab without recognizing that their paradigm is that there's no intelligence that started anything, and yet they're applying their intelligence to all the necessary things with their understanding of chemistry and biology to try and make it happen. So even that should cause them to take pause. What they should do is just throw chemicals around and wait for a few billion years to see if they come together, not use their intelligence to try and make it happen. But even with their intelligence, they can't make them come together. They can make one of them come together if they get a certain pool of chemicals together with a certain amount of voltage electricity. And, oh, we made this one. See, we made this one. But you have to have a completely different set of environment and conditions to make the second one and the third one and the fourth one. And so but what we're finding is that all five of them were found on an asteroid in the vacuum and near absolute zero temperature of space on two different asteroids. And Bill and I would say, along with Walt Brown, if he was still here, it doesn't matter where you go, you're going to find the same. And Bill and I were talking about, they found them on both asteroids when only a small portion of this was on Ryugu. So imagine how littered Ryugu asteroid and Bennu asteroid, littered with evidences of life from Earth. The nucleobases they're screaming, scientifically screaming, life got sent to these asteroids. They're pulverized, and we'll be talking about that in a minute, but they were, and actually it'll be our next podcast, we'll talk about how things got pulverized. Life got pulverized into these nucleobases, but they still scream they came from life. And they also found sugar gum on stardust found on NASA's Bennu sample. This was shocking to them too. The sugars necessary for turning nucleobases into nucleotides. And yet those building blocks were there. All 5 nucleobases necessary for DNA and RNA were found on 2 different asteroids by 2 different countries, 2 different clean rooms. Therefore, the scientific evidence strongly suggests that the nucleobases found on Ryugu and Bennu came from biotic living things, and therefore the amino acids did too. And we're going to talk about amino acids next week. So Dr. Feldman, there are no Dr. Feldman says, there are no traces of plants or bacteria, only chemicals which may or may not have come from life. I mean, for him to say no evidence of bacteria, he's ignoring decades of evolutionary-minded scientists' data. And when he says plants, you're not going to go find a plant that you can plant in your garden up in space because it's been pulverized into bits and pieces of amino acids and nucleotides. And he wants to say, no, there's no life, which only comes from God. No life. It was only chemicals. And we're going to say, you're wrong again, Dr. Feldman, and every other evolutionist that buys into the evolutionary Santa Claus paradigm. So we want to pray for those, as I said last week, have been deceived by evolutionary time and chance God. It's so critical. You grieve over people that are deceived into, giving their money. Somebody calls on the phone and I've got your relative, and if you don't send money, I'm going to kill them. And so they send the money, and they find out that it was AI voice that deceived them into thinking that it was their son or daughter that was kidnapped by them. And they grieve over the fact that they were deceived. But that's only a few bucks here on a temporary earth. It's not the deception of what happens when we die and we stand before the God that created us. So which God are you going to serve? We're saying this to our audience, evolutionary, Christian, whatever. What God are we going to serve? Are we going to serve the one who loved us so much that he sent Jesus into the world to make a way for us to be saved from our sins, which we all, I bet you if I were to talk to Dr. Feldman, and I've talked to dozens of evolutionists over the years, atheist evolutionists, well, have you ever sinned? They say yes. Well, I say, you're contradictory to your dogma. You believe there's no God, so there is no sin. And yet there's sin, which the Bible says we all have a conscience inside of us that we've sinned, like lying about other people's work. And so we need to be saved from our sins, and Jesus made a way for us to do that. The God of time and chance, who has been invented by those who want to deceive you, is leading people astray. And our mission, Bill's my mission, is here for the purpose of helping everybody that's listening to grow in a deeper faith in God, because we know his word is true. There was a flood. It did flood the whole world. The fountains of the great deep did burst up. They sent stuff into space through the open window of God, and we are finding it, and God is allowing us to find it to testify that he told us the truth. And we, instead of trying to explain this data away or say it doesn't exist, we should embrace it and say, wow, that's an amazing God who left us even evidence that what he says is true. And with that, we pray that you would draw closer to God or come to Jesus as your Savior. And that's the end of our 8th podcast, August 12th, 2026. And God bless you.
Thank you for viewing this episode of Hydroplate Theory University. We hope you'll return for future episodes. Please like, subscribe, spread the word, and be sure to visit creationscience.com, where you can find more great hydroplate theory resources.